My name is Blackwell, and I want you to understand something before we begin. Every pandemic in recorded human history started the exact same way. Not with a government, not with a laboratory, not with a conspiracy. It started with one person, one decision, one moment that nobody filmed, nobody wrote down, nobody remembered until it was too late to matter. 6 pandemics, 6 hinges of history, 6 names you have never heard. And by the time I am finished, you will understand why the next one is already on its way, and why the warning signs are already being ignored in exactly the same pattern, in exactly the same way, by exactly the same kind of people. I have spent 11 years pulling archives, ship manifests from the 14th century, military medical logs from 1918 that the United States Army tried to bury for 40 years, Soviet epidemiological reports that were declassified and then quietly reclassified, a photocopy of Dr. Wenliang's original message to his medical school WeChat group. Timestamp: December 30th, 2019, 5:43 in the afternoon, Wuhan local time. Every single one of these pandemics could have been stopped. Every single one had a window, and every single window was closed by the same thing: a man in a uniform, a man with a title, a man who said the words, "It is nothing, go back to work, stop talking about this." You are about to meet 6 of them, the people who pulled the trigger on history. Let us begin. The year is 1347, October, the Sicilian port of Messina. The sky is the color of wet ash. 12 Genoese war galleys limp into the harbor at sunset, riding low in the water, sails half torn, oars moving slow and get all 12 vessels. The number of men still standing on the decks now, after a journey of perhaps 6 weeks, is somewhere around 40. 40 men, on 12 ships. The rest are not missing. The rest are still there, piled in the holds, piled on the lower decks, piled against the railings, piled on top of each other in the cramped quarters below the main mast. The smell, according to the harbor log, reaches shore before the ships do. Andrea Doria stands on the prow of his flagship. His skin is yellow. His neck is swollen. Under his armpits and at his groin, there are black lumps the size of small apples. He has been ordering his men to throw the dead overboard for the last 11 days. He stopped ordering it 4 days ago because there was no one left alive to carry the corpses. He himself has been doing it, alone, dragging bodies across a bloody deck, heaving them into the Mediterranean one at a time. He has watched his own lieutenant die in his arms 3 nights ago, a man he had known since they were boys in Genoa. Now he stands on the prow, and he looks at the harbor master of Messina, a man named Girolamo Spadafora. And Spadafora looks at him, and Spadafora sees, plainly, visibly, with his own eyes, exactly what is standing in front of him. He sees a dying man on a dying ship at the front of a dying fleet. He sees the yellow skin. He sees the black swellings on Doria's neck. He sees the bodies stacked like cordwood behind him. He sees the flies. And Girolamo Spadafora, harbor master of Messina, makes the decision. He waves the ships in. He lets them dock. He lets the survivors come ashore. He lets the rats come with them. Understand what I am telling you. The warning was visible from shore. The warning was screaming. The warning was a floating charnel house wrapped in Genoese sailcloth. And Spadafora, in his logbook that night, writes one line: 12 vessels arrived from the east, crews sickly, unloaded per standard procedure. That is the sentence. That is the sentence that kills 200 million people. The ships had come from Kaffa, in modern Ukraine, on the Crimean Peninsula. And in Kaffa, something had happened that had never happened before. A Mongol army, led by a Khan named Johnny Beg, had been besieging the Genoese trading post for 3 years. In 1346, Johnny Beg's army itself began to die of a strange sickness. Men dropping in the ranks, fever, black swellings, dead in 3 days. The Khan, facing the collapse of his own siege from disease, gave an order that the Genoese defenders would remember until they died. He ordered his engineers to load the corpses of his own plague dead onto the trebuchets and launch them over the walls into the Genoese city. This is the first recorded instance of biological warfare in European history. And it worked. The city of Kaffa became a graveyard. The survivors, led by Andrea Doria and 11 other captains, fled west, hoping to outrun what was inside them. They did not know it was already inside them. They carried it down the Bosphorus, through Constantinople, past the Greek islands, up into the Adriatic, around Sicily, and into Messina harbor on that October evening in 1347. The first dead Messinan is a harborside dock worker named Giovanni Baresi. He is 31. He has a wife, Caterina, and 4 children. He helps unload cargo from the lead Genoese galley on the afternoon of October 2nd. By the morning of October 5th, he cannot get out of bed. By the evening of October 6th, there is a black swelling in his armpit, the size of a hen's egg. By the night of October 7th, he is dead. Caterina Baresi washes his body, as is the custom. By October 14th, she is dead. So are 3 of the 4 children. Within 2 weeks, the city of Messina is losing 100 people a day. Within a month, it is losing 300. By Christmas of 1347, 70% of the population of Messina is in the ground. The Genoese ships, those that can still sail, are expelled by panicked local authorities. But it is too late. The expelled ships carry the plague to Marseille. From Marseille, it walks inland. It reaches Paris in the summer of 1348, London by the autumn. It kills the King of Castile. It kills the Queen of France. It kills 1/3 of every human being living on the continent of Europe within 4 years. 200 million dead across Europe, Asia, and North Africa over 7 years. And the entire chain traces back to one harbor master named Girolamo Spatafora, who saw the plague ships with his own eyes and waved them in, and wrote a single sentence in his log. Andrea Doria, the captain, dies 3 weeks later in his family villa outside Genoa, having somehow made it home on a smaller coastal vessel. He is buried in the family crypt. His name appears in the Doria family genealogy with the notation, "Died of the great mortality." That is all. No investigation, no inquest, no lessons learned. And here is the thing that keeps me awake. Girolamo Spatafora had a job. Harbor masters in medieval Italian ports had, by law, the authority to refuse entry to any ship that appeared diseased. They had that authority specifically because plague ships were a known phenomenon. The authority existed, the precedent existed. The obvious visual evidence was standing on the deck in the form of a dying Genoese captain with black lumps on his neck, and he waved them in anyway. Why? That is the question Blackwell has been trying to answer for 11 years. Why did he do it? The best I can tell you is this. The Genoese ships had cargo, silk, spices, coin. The harbor fees were substantial. The captain, Doria, was a Genoese nobleman. Turning him away would have meant a diplomatic incident. And Spatafora, like every bureaucrat before him and every bureaucrat after him, chose the path of least resistance. He chose the smaller problem in front of him over the larger problem he could not yet imagine. That is the pattern. Remember it, because you will see it again in every single story I am about to tell you. The year is 1520, April. A Spanish caravel named the Ayacucho drops anchor off the coast of Veracruz in what is now Mexico. The ship is carrying reinforcements for a Spanish captain named Panfilo de Narvaez, who has been sent from Cuba on a mission to arrest another Spanish captain named Hernán Cortés, who has been conducting an unauthorized military campaign in the interior of the Aztec Empire. Among the passengers on the Ayacucho is an enslaved African man named Francisco de Eguía. He is, according to the only surviving manifest, between 22 and 25 years old. He was purchased in Santiago de Cuba 4 months earlier. His birthplace is listed as Cape Verde, though this is probably wrong, as the Spanish used Cape Verde as a catch-all port of origin for enslaved Africans, regardless of actual provenance. Francisco de Aguilla is sick when he steps off the ship. He has a fever. He has a rash that is just beginning to form red spots across his chest, shoulders, and face. He cannot keep food down. He is, within 36 hours of landfall, unable to stand. What Francisco de Aguilla has is smallpox, variola major, the most efficient killer the human species had ever encountered up to that point in history. Smallpox had been circulating in Europe, Asia, and Africa for at least 1,000 years. Adult populations in those continents had developed partial herd immunity. Children died of it. Adults sometimes died of it. But the disease was endemic, familiar, managed. It was part of the background noise of being human. In the Americas, it was not. The populations of the Americas had been genetically isolated from the Old World for roughly 15,000 years. They had never encountered smallpox. They had no immunity, not partial immunity, none, zero. The virus, upon entering a population with no prior exposure, would kill between 70 and 90% of those it infected. It would not be a wave, it would be a wall. Narvaez lands at Veracruz. He moves inland. Aguilla is carried along with the column because the Spanish do not leave sick slaves behind. Within days of the Spanish reaching the Aztec city of Zempoala, the first indigenous person dies. Within a week, there are hundreds. Within a month, the disease has leapfrogged ahead of the Spanish column and reached Tenochtitlan itself, the Aztec capital, a city of 200,000 people, built on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, one of the largest cities in the world at that moment, larger than any city in Spain, larger than Paris, larger than London. The Aztec emperor Moctezuma II has already been killed in the earlier phase of the Spanish campaign. He died in June of 1520, either stoned by his own people or quietly executed by Cortés, depending on which account you read. His successor is his brother, Cuitlahuac. Cuitlahuac takes the throne at the end of June. Cuitlahuac leads the Aztec counterattack that drives Cortés out of Tenochtitlan on the night of July 1st, 1520, in what the Spanish would remember, licking their wounds, as La Noche Triste, the sad night. Understand what this means. The Aztecs won. They won militarily. On June 30th, 1520, Hernán Cortés's expedition was a catastrophic failure. More than 600 Spanish soldiers were killed in the retreat. The Aztecs had driven the invaders out of their capital. The war, as far as any reasonable observer could have told you on the 1st of July, 1520, was over, and Moctezuma's successor, Cuitlahuac, was the man who had driven Cortés into the lake. Cuitlahuac reigns as emperor of the Aztec Empire for exactly 80 days. He contracts smallpox sometime in late September of 1520. He dies in the first week of December. His reign lasts less time than it takes a woman to carry a child from the first missed period to the second. The empire that had just defeated the most advanced military force in the Western world is decapitated not by a sword, not by a musket, not by a horse, but by a virus that walked off a Spanish ship inside the bloodstream of a 23-year-old enslaved African. When Cortés returns to Tenochtitlan in May of 1521, he does not find the army that defeated him 11 months earlier. He finds a charnel house. The Aztec chronicler Bernardino de Sahagún, writing decades later from eyewitness accounts, describes what the survivors told him. Entire neighborhoods of Tenochtitlan silent, bodies in the streets, bodies in the canals, families dead in their houses, swollen and stinking, with no one left to bury them. Babies trying to nurse from the breasts of dead mothers. Dogs eating the dead because there were no humans left to drive them off. The Aztec Empire does not fall to Cortés. The Aztec Empire falls to a virus that Cortés did not bring, did not plan, did not understand, and could not have controlled even if he had wanted to. And the vector, the walking petri dish, the one human body that carried the weapon that ended one of the great civilizations of the Western Hemisphere, is Francisco de Aguilla, an enslaved African man. whose name appears on exactly one ship's manifest, who, as far as we can determine, survives his illness, returns to Spain some years later with Narvaez's surviving men, and disappears entirely from the historical record. He almost certainly dies of natural causes, old age, in some Spanish coastal town, having no idea, no possible conception of what he had done. The final death toll. Across the entire Western Hemisphere over the following century, as smallpox, along with measles, typhus, and influenza, spread from the point of contact in Veracruz across 2 continents, is estimated by modern epidemiologists at 56 million people. 90% of the pre-contact indigenous population of the Americas. It is the single largest demographic collapse in recorded human history, larger than the Black Death, larger than both world wars combined, larger than anything. And it starts with one sick man walking down a gangplank onto a Mexican beach. Here is what Blackwell wants you to notice. The Spanish knew. The Spanish crown had issued explicit orders forbidding the transportation of visibly sick slaves on ships bound for the New World. Those orders existed. Those orders were ignored. Francisco de Aguirre was carried aboard the Ayacucho in Santiago de Cuba while already exhibiting the preliminary symptoms of smallpox. The ship's captain, a man named Pedro de Maluenda, signed off on his transport anyway. Because Aguirre had already been paid for, because the voyage was already scheduled, because the smaller problem in front of him was more real than the larger problem he could not yet imagine. The same pattern. Again. A man whose job was to stop exactly this, who did not stop it, because the paperwork was already filed. We move forward 398 years, to another ship, to another sick man, to another bureaucrat who waved him aboard. The year is 1918, March 4th, Fort Riley, Kansas, a United States Army training base the size of a small city, holding 26,000 soldiers preparing to deploy to the Western Front in France. The air outside is still cold. There has been snow on the ground for most of February. Inside the mess hall of the Camp Funston section of the base, a young Army cook named Albert Gitchell is serving breakfast to the men of the 53rd Pioneer Infantry. Gitchell is 26 years old. He grew up on a farm outside Haskell County in western Kansas. He enlisted 8 months earlier. He is, by every account that survives, an unremarkable man. Quiet, well-liked, reliable. He wakes up that morning at 4:30 to start the stoves. He cooks for 3 hours. At 7:15, while the second wave of soldiers is still eating, he begins coughing. He cannot stop. He coughs so hard he bends double over the serving line. He coughs until his eyes water. He coughs until he has to go outside and lean against the kitchen wall in the Kansas cold. At 8 minutes past 9 o'clock that morning, Albert Gitchell walks into the Fort Riley Base Infirmary and reports himself sick. The duty medical officer, a young Army doctor named Edward Schreiner, records Gitchell's symptoms in the base medical log. Fever of 103.4, violent cough, severe headache, muscle pain throughout the body, sore throat. Schreiner notes the word influenza in the margin with a question mark and assigns Gitchell to a cot in the isolation ward. By 11 o'clock that same morning, a corporal named Lee W. Drake reports to the same infirmary with identical symptoms. By noon, Sergeant Adolph Herbie. By 1 in the afternoon, 7 more men. By the end of that day, March 4th, 1918, 107 soldiers from Camp Funston are in the infirmary coughing blood into their pillowcases. By the end of the week, 522. By the end of the month, 1,100. The base hospital has to commandeer an aircraft hangar because it has run out of beds. This is the first recorded outbreak of what the world will eventually call the 1918 influenza pandemic, the Spanish flu. And Blackwell has to stop you right here because the name is a lie, and the lie itself is part of the story. The flu did not come from Spain. The flu came from Kansas. The reason it got the name Spanish flu is because every combatant nation in the First World War, the United States, Britain, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, was censoring its own press to hide the outbreak from its own population and from its enemies. Reporting on a disease sweeping through military training camps and trench lines was considered a threat to national morale and a gift to the enemy's intelligence services, so nobody reported it in any of those countries. Spain was neutral. Spain's press was not censored. When the Spanish king, Alfonso XIII, contracted the disease in May of 1918, Spanish newspapers reported it openly. The rest of the world, seeing reports coming out of Spain and no reports coming out of anywhere else, concluded that the disease must have started in Spain. It did not. It started in a mess hall in Kansas on March 4th at 9:08 in the morning, in the lungs of a 26-year-old army cook named Albert Gitchell. And here is the part that matters, the part that the United States Army did not want in the newspapers, the part that killed between 50 and 100 million people worldwide over the following 18 months. Dr. Edward Schreiner, the Fort Riley medical officer, recommended on March 7th, 3 days into the outbreak, that all troop deployments from Fort Riley to Europe be suspended. He recommended a quarantine of the entire base. He put the recommendation in writing. He sent it up the chain of command to the base commander, a brigadier general named Charles G. Ballou. General Ballou received the recommendation. General Ballou forwarded it to the War Department in Washington. The War Department responded within 72 hours. The response is in the archives. It is 1 paragraph long. It states that troop deployments are a matter of national strategic priority, that the influenza outbreak is a routine seasonal occurrence, that quarantine would be an unacceptable disruption to the war effort, and that General Ballou is instructed to maintain the deployment schedule as planned. Ballou maintained the schedule. Between March and June of 1918, 84,000 American soldiers carrying the Fort Riley strain of influenza in their lungs boarded troop ships in New York, Boston, and Hampton Roads. They crossed the Atlantic. They disembarked in French ports. They marched into the trenches of the Western Front. And they brought the virus with them into the single most efficient virus incubation environment human beings had ever constructed. A system of muddy, crowded, malnourished, sleep-deprived, chemically exposed young men packed into narrow holes in the ground, stretching from the English Channel to the Swiss border. The virus, in the trenches, did something viruses rarely do. It mutated. Fast. And it mutated in a direction that almost never happens in nature. It became more lethal. Under normal evolutionary pressure, a virus that kills its host too quickly tends to burn out because dead hosts do not spread disease. The trenches of the Western Front removed that evolutionary pressure. In the trenches, a sick soldier who could still walk was sent to the rear, where he spread the virus to hundreds of healthy soldiers being moved forward. A soldier too sick to walk was loaded onto a hospital train, where he spread it to medical personnel and other wounded men. A soldier who died was replaced within hours by a fresh soldier from a training camp behind the lines. The virus had, for the first time in evolutionary history, a situation where being more deadly actually increased its spread, because the war machine itself was moving bodies around faster than the virus could kill them. By August of 1918, the trench-mutated strain had become the second wave, and the second wave was the monster. The first wave, the Fort Riley strain, had a mortality rate of roughly 0.5%, bad but manageable. The second wave killed between 2 and 20% of those it infected, depending on population and access to medical care. And its signature killing technique was something doctors had never seen before in any influenza. It triggered a cytokine storm, a massive overreaction of the human immune system that caused the lungs to fill with blood and fluid within hours of the first symptoms. Healthy young men, aged 18 to 35, the exact demographic of soldiers at the front, died faster than children or the elderly. A soldier could report for breakfast in apparent perfect health, be coughing at lunch, be bleeding from the nose and ears by dinner, and be dead before dawn. Black feet, blue lips, drowning in their own lung fluid, awake the whole time. The second wave returned to the United States in September of 1918 on troop ships carrying wounded and demobilized soldiers. It entered Boston through the Commonwealth Pier Naval Facility on August 27th. From Boston, it reached Philadelphia within 2 weeks. Philadelphia, whose public health director, a political appointee named Wilmer Cruzen, refused to cancel a Liberty Loan war bonds parade scheduled for September 28th, despite the explicit warnings of every epidemiologist in the city. 200,000 people attended the parade. Within 72 hours, every hospital bed in Philadelphia was full. Within 1 week, the city was burying 1,200 people a day. Mass graves were being dug by steam shovels in the city's largest cemetery because undertakers could not keep up. Global death toll over the 18 months the pandemic ran. The most cited modern figure is 50 million dead. Recent epidemiological revisions push that number toward 100 million. Either figure represents between 3 and 5% of the entire human population of the planet in 1918. Killed by a virus that walked out of a mess hall in Kansas on a Monday morning in the lungs of one man. Albert Gitchell survived the illness. He recovered at Fort Riley and was eventually, after the war, quietly discharged from the Army. He returned to Kansas. He lived a normal civilian life. He married. He worked. He died of natural causes in Shawnee County, Kansas in 1968, age 77. The man who is the most plausible candidate for patient zero of the single deadliest pandemic in modern human history lived a full, quiet, unremarkable life and died in his own bed 50 years after the event. His obituary in the local paper mentioned that he had served as an army cook during the Great War. It did not mention anything else. General Charles G. Ballou, the base commander who forwarded Schreiner's quarantine recommendation to Washington and complied when Washington rejected it, was promoted. He commanded the 92nd Infantry Division in France. He retired a major general. He died in 1941 with full military honors and is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. The War Department officials who made the decision to reject the quarantine were never identified by name in any surviving document. The order was institutional. It came from the building, not from a man. And that, Blackwell will tell you, is the most dangerous kind of decision. The kind with no name attached. Notice the pattern again. A medical officer, the correct person in the correct chair, made the correct recommendation in writing at the exact right moment. His superiors, for reasons of institutional convenience, overruled him. The warning was delivered. The warning was logged. The warning was filed. And then the warning was ignored. Because the smaller problem of disrupting the deployment schedule felt more real than the larger problem of what was incubating in the lungs of 84,000 young men about to cross the Atlantic. It is always the same pattern. It is always the same failure. And it is about to happen again, and again, and again, through the 20th century, into the 21st. Let me show you. The year is approximately 1920. The location is the southeastern corner of what was then French Cameroon, in the deep rainforest watershed of the Sangha River, which flows south to join the Congo. A hunter, whose name we do not know and will never know, is working alone in the forest. He is carrying a machete, a muzzle-loading rifle, and a woven basket on his back. He is tracking a troop of chimpanzees. He finds one. He shoots it. He approaches the body to butcher it for meat and to carry it back to his village. In the process of butchering, while his hands and forearms are covered in chimpanzee blood, he cuts himself, a small cut, on the palm of his left hand. Deep enough to bleed, not deep enough to stop work. He keeps working. He wraps the meat. He walks back to his village. The cut scabs over in 3 days. He forgets about it. Inside his bloodstream, at the moment of that cut, a retrovirus has just crossed a species barrier that it had been probing for centuries without success. The virus is called simian immunodeficiency virus. It is endemic in West African chimpanzee populations. Chimpanzees tolerate it. Their immune systems have co-evolved with it for millions of years. In a chimpanzee, SIV causes a mild, chronic, manageable infection. Most chimpanzees live normal lifespans with it. In the hunter, the virus does something it has never done before. It mutates into a form that can replicate efficiently in human T cells. It becomes what we now call HIV-1 Group M, the strain responsible for over 95% of all HIV infections in human history. The mutation occurs, we now believe, sometime between 1910 and 1930, almost certainly in the hunter's bloodstream during the initial infection. The hunter does not die of it. He cannot. The virus, at this stage of its evolution, takes between 8 and 15 years to progress to full AIDS. And in a rural African village in 1920, nobody lives long enough after a minor cut for the virus to matter. He will die of something else first: malaria, yellow fever, an infected tooth, a hippopotamus, a crocodile, a neighbor with a grievance. Something will kill him within 5 to 7 years, statistically, and the virus will die with him. Or will it? Here is where the story turns. Here is where the accident becomes an event. Here is where Blackwell has to walk you through something that almost no general audience has ever been told. The hunter did not stay in his village. We know this because we can trace the virus's genetic clock using modern molecular phylogenetics, backward from present-day HIV strains to a single common ancestor, with an estimated date and geographic location. The virus's most recent common ancestor lived in a human being, somewhere along the upper Sangha River around 1920, and the virus, from that point, traveled. It traveled by river. The Sangha empties into the Congo. The Congo, in the 1920s, was the central artery of Belgian colonial commerce in Central Africa. Riverboats, steamers, canoes moved men and cargo up and down its length. The virus moved with them. It reached the city of Leopoldville, which is now called Kinshasa, by approximately 1925. And in Leopoldville, two things happened that turned a localized zoonotic accident into a continental and ultimately global catastrophe. The first thing was the Belgian colonial medical campaigns. Starting in the 1920s and continuing through the 1940s, the Belgian colonial government in the Congo conducted massive mass injection campaigns against sleeping sickness, yaws, syphilis, and several other diseases. The campaigns were well-intentioned. They saved millions of lives. They also, because of a shortage of needles and a complete absence of modern sterilization protocols, used the same syringe and needle on dozens, sometimes hundreds, of patients in sequence without cleaning it. A single HIV-positive patient treated early the mining regions of Katanga. The railway moved men. It moved them away from their villages, their wives, their families, for months at a time, to work in mines and on construction projects. And where large populations of young men live, far from home for extended periods, a commercial sex industry emerges. Leopoldville in the 1940s and 1950s had thousands of sex workers. Many were HIV positive. The infection spread exponentially through the city and outward along the railway lines and truck routes that were being built to exploit the colony's mineral wealth. By the time of Congolese independence in 1960, HIV is already circulating at low levels across Central Africa. It has not yet reached Europe or the Americas in significant numbers. It has not yet been noticed by any medical authority anywhere. It is hiding in the statistical noise of a continent where tropical diseases kill millions of people every year, and a new, slow-acting virus looks like nothing in particular. The virus reaches Haiti, we now believe, in the 1960s, carried by Haitian professionals who worked in the newly independent Congo as technical staff and teachers, and who returned home when the post-independence chaos made their jobs untenable. From Haiti, it reaches the United States, almost certainly through a single transmission event in 1969. It circulates undetected in the gay male population of New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco for 12 years. It circulates in the intravenous drug-using population of New York for the same 12 years. It circulates in the hemophiliac community through the blood products industry for the same 12 years. And then, in the spring of 1981, a Los Angeles immunologist named Michael Gottlieb notices something strange in 5 of his patients. Young men, all gay, all dying of a pneumonia, pneumocystis carinii, that should only kill severely immunocompromised people. He writes it up. He publishes a brief report in the CDC's Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report on June 5, 1981. The report runs 3 paragraphs. It is the first public medical notice of what the world will eventually call AIDS. And from that point, the virus comes out of the shadows and begins killing people in numbers the world cannot ignore. 40 million dead to date. Another 39 million currently living with the infection. In the developed world, antiretroviral therapy has, since the mid-1990s, reduced HIV from a death sentence to a manageable chronic condition. In the developing world, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, it continues to kill on a scale that remains difficult to comprehend. Botswana, Lesotho, Swaziland. These are countries where, at the peak of the epidemic in the early 2000s, 1 in 3 adults was HIV positive, where life expectancy dropped by 20 years in a single decade, where entire generations of children grew up orphaned. All of it. Every single case. Every single death. Every single infection. All of it traces back through the molecular clock to one unnamed hunter in the Congo Basin, approximately 1920, who cut his hand butchering a chimpanzee. And here, Blackwell has to point out something that is philosophically uncomfortable. The hunter did nothing wrong. He was not reckless. He was not negligent. He was doing, competently and carefully, a thing that his people had done for 10,000 years without consequence. Hunting chimpanzees for meat was a normal, legitimate, skilled activity in his society. He did not know that the specific chimpanzee he killed was carrying a specific strain of SIV that had, through random mutation, become transmissible to humans. Nobody knew. Nobody could have known. The mutation was invisible. But here is where the pattern reasserts itself. Because the hunter's cut was the accident would have ended with him in his village within a decade. What turned the accident into the pandemic was a series of decisions made by named, identifiable human beings in positions of institutional authority. The decision to reuse needles on mass injection campaigns was made by Belgian colonial medical directors whose names are on the archival documents. They knew, or should have known, that needle reuse carried risk. They did it anyway, because sterilization was expensive and funding was limited, and the smaller problem of budget constraints was more real than the larger problem of a hypothetical blood-borne pathogen that had not yet been identified. The decision to accept commercial blood products from donors in high-risk populations without adequate screening was made, in the United States, in the 1970s and early 1980s by named executives at named pharmaceutical companies. Those companies were Cutter, Armor, Alpha Therapeutic, Baxter. Their executives are named in the court records of the subsequent wrongful death lawsuits. They knew by 1982 that their Factor VIII blood products for hemophiliacs were contaminated with something. They did not know what. They continued shipping the products anyway, in many cases for years after internal warnings were raised, because recalling the products would have been financially catastrophic, and the smaller problem of quarterly earnings was more real than the larger problem of people dying. The decision, in the early years of the AIDS epidemic in the United States, to treat it as a gay men's disease, and to refuse federal research funding proportionate to its severity, was made by named officials in the Reagan administration. The press secretary, Larry Speakes, laughed about it on camera in October of 1982, in an exchange that is preserved on tape. A reporter asked about AIDS. Speakes made a joke about whether the reporter had it. The press corps laughed. That is the tone at which the United States government approached the disease during the first 4 years of the epidemic. The president, Ronald Reagan, did not publicly say the word AIDS until September of 1985. by which point over 12,000 Americans were already dead. Same pattern, every time. The accident is random. The pandemic is a choice. The hunter in the Congo Basin died in obscurity. His name is not in any record. He almost certainly never knew that his small cut had done anything at all. He would be dead by 1940 at the latest, probably earlier. He died of some other thing, in some other way, and was buried in some unmarked grave along the Sangha River, and the virus he had accidentally carried out of the forest went on without him to kill 40 million people over the next century. Blackwell moves us forward, 62 years. The year is 2002, November 16th. The city of Foshan in Guangdong Province, southern China. A 38-year-old restaurant chef named Pang Zuoyao is working his shift at the Sanshui District Restaurant, where he has been employed for the last 6 years. The restaurant specializes in exotic meats. That afternoon, Pang personally butchers 3 animals for the evening service: a snake, a chicken, and a masked palm civet, a small raccoon-like mammal that is considered a local delicacy. The civet was trapped in a rural area of Guangdong 2 days earlier by a wildlife trader. It was caged, transported, and held at the restaurant in conditions that modern epidemiology would describe as a perfect zoonotic amplification environment. Close contact, stress, weakened immunity, direct blood-to-blood exposure during slaughter. The civet was infected with a coronavirus it had picked up from horseshoe bats, the original reservoir species, through some chain of intermediate contact that we still do not fully understand. Pang Zuoyao butchers the civet with his bare hands. He handles the blood. He handles the organs. He wipes sweat from his face with the back of his wrist. He does all of this on a Tuesday afternoon. By Friday night, he has a fever of 103 degrees. By Sunday morning, he cannot breathe without help. By Monday, he is in the Sanshui District People's Hospital on oxygen, with bilateral pneumonia that is not responding to any antibiotic the hospital has in stock. The doctors who treat him do not know what they are looking at. They have never seen it before. They note in his chart that his lung x-rays show diffuse ground glass opacities, a pattern associated with viral pneumonia, but more severe than anything they have encountered in their careers. They try every antibiotic in the pharmacy. They try antivirals. They try steroids. Nothing works. Pang survives, barely, over the course of 3 weeks. He is discharged in mid-December in a severely weakened state, having lost 20 kilograms of body weight. 2 of the nurses who treated him are already coughing. The hospital reports the unusual pneumonia cluster to the Guangdong Provincial Health Department. The Guangdong Provincial Health Department acknowledges the report and files it. Nothing else happens. Not because the Chinese medical system failed to recognize the seriousness of the outbreak, because the Chinese political system recognized it and chose to suppress it. On January 23, 2003, more than 2 months after Pang Zuoyao's initial infection, a Chinese medical researcher named Zhang Nanshan, working at the Guangzhou Institute of Respiratory Diseases, compiles a confidential internal report on what is now a provincial outbreak with over 300 cases. His report uses the term atypical pneumonia. He recommends immediate public notification, quarantine protocols, and information sharing with the World Health Organization. The report is classified. The provincial party leadership in Guangdong, acting in coordination with the Central Propaganda Department in Beijing, orders a complete media blackout on the outbreak. The rationale is economic. Guangdong is the manufacturing heartland of China. Any news of a strange new respiratory disease circulating in the province would, the leadership calculates, damage foreign investment, disrupt supply chains, and embarrass the Chinese government internationally ahead of the upcoming annual meeting of the National People's Congress. The smaller problem of political optics is, once again, more real to the decision makers than the larger problem of an uncontained novel pathogen. Dr. Zhang Nanshan complies with the classification order. He continues to treat patients. He continues to report internally. He does not go public. Nobody at the Guangzhou Institute goes public. The news of the outbreak leaks sideways through a single SMS text message, which is forwarded between Guangdong residents and eventually posted to an online bulletin board on February 10, 2003. By that point, the outbreak has been quietly spreading for over 3 months. Hundreds are infected. Dozens are dead. The government of China has told the World Health Organization nothing. On February 21, 2003, a 64-year-old nephrology professor named Liu Jianlun, who works at the Sun Yat-sen Memorial Hospital in Guangzhou and has been treating SARS patients for the previous 2 weeks, travels to Hong Kong to attend his nephew's wedding. He checks into the Metropole Hotel in Kowloon. He is assigned to room 911. He is already symptomatic when he arrives. He has a fever, he has a cough. He attends the wedding anyway. He returns to his hotel room at the end of the evening. He walks down the 9th floor hallway to his room. Sometime during his brief stay at the Metropole Hotel, in the corridor outside room 911, Dr. Liu Jianlun coughs or sneezes or vomits, we are not sure which, and contaminates the carpeted hallway floor. 16 other hotel guests, staying in other rooms on the 9th floor, walk through that hallway over the following 12 hours. Those 16 guests, when they check out of the Metropole and fly home, carry SARS to 7 different countries in the space of 3 days: Singapore, Vietnam, Canada, the United States, Ireland, the Philippines, Taiwan. By the time the World Health Organization issues its first global alert on March 12, 2003, SARS is circulating on 4 continents. Dr. Liu Jianlun dies in Hong Kong's Kwong Wah Hospital on March 4th, having become too ill to fly home. He is one of the first people in history to die of a disease he carried to a country that had no idea it was coming. The final numbers for the SARS outbreak: 8,096 infections across 29 countries, 774 deaths. Economic damage estimated at $40 billion. It could have been orders of magnitude worse. The only reason it was not is that SARS had a peculiarity that COVID-19, its genetic cousin, would not share 17 years later. SARS patients were generally not infectious until they were severely symptomatic, which meant that isolation of symptomatic patients actually worked to break transmission chains. The outbreak was contained by July of 2003 through an extraordinary global effort of quarantine, contact tracing, and isolation, led by the World Health Organization over the active obstruction of the Chinese government. Pang Zuoyao, the chef, patient 0, survived his infection, recovered fully over the course of a year. He did not die. He is, as of the last media interview he gave in 2018, still alive, still living in Guangdong, working a different job. The man whose hands butchered the animal that started the first coronavirus pandemic of the 21st century lives a normal life, as far as anyone has reported. He has been interviewed twice by Chinese state media. Both interviews focus on his recovery. Neither interview addresses the chain of causation between his kitchen and the global outbreak. The Chinese officials who suppressed the initial reports were, years later, quietly rotated out of their provincial positions. None were prosecuted. None were publicly named in any official accounting. The central government, in 2003, issued a formal apology to the WHO for delayed information sharing. The apology was not accompanied by any institutional reform that would prevent the same suppression from happening again, which matters because the same suppression was about to happen again, in the same country, in a slightly different province, on a much larger scale. SARS was contained in 8 months, and Blackwell will tell you, straight, that the world spent the next 8 years congratulating itself on the containment and systematically defunding the public health infrastructure that had made the containment possible. Pandemic preparedness budgets in the United States, in Europe, in most developed countries were cut year after year through the 2010s. Pandemic drills were quietly removed from national security exercises. The National Security Council Pandemic Response Directorate in the White House was disbanded in 2018. The warning of SARS, like every warning before it, was heard, logged, filed. and then ignored. Because the smaller problem of budget constraints was more real than the larger problem that the next coronavirus was already, at that moment, circulating in a bat cave in Yunnan province, waiting for the right evolutionary opportunity to cross a species barrier it had been probing for decades. That opportunity came, and Blackwell will now tell you about the last man on this list, the man whose story is the freshest, whose death is the most recent, whose silencing is the most directly documented, and whose case proves, beyond any reasonable argument, that the pattern Blackwell has been showing you across 673 years of human history has not changed, has not improved, has not been learned from, and is, right now, setting up the next one. The year is 2019, December 30th. The city of Wuhan, capital of Hubei province, central China. It is a Monday. The time is 5:43 in the afternoon, local time. In the ophthalmology department of Wuhan Central Hospital, a 33-year-old doctor named Wenliang is sitting at his workstation after a long clinical shift, typing a message into a private WeChat group. The WeChat group consists of Wenliang and 7 former classmates from his medical school years at Wuhan University. All are doctors, all are friends. The group is private. It is not public social media. It is the digital equivalent of a group text message among a small circle of professional peers. Wenliang's message is brief. He reports that his hospital has admitted 7 patients over the previous several days who are presenting with a severe pneumonia of unknown etiology. He notes that lab results on the first patients are returning consistent with a SARS-like coronavirus. He attaches a screenshot of one patient's lab report, with the patient's identifying information redacted. He tells his 7 friends, and I am paraphrasing from the Chinese, to be careful, to wear protective equipment, to warn their own families. That is the message. That is the entire content of the communication that will, within 5 weeks, cost Dr. Wenliang his life, and, within 14 months, kill 7 million people worldwide, according to official counts, or approximately 27 million, according to the best estimates of excess mortality statisticians. The message is screenshotted by one of the recipients and forwarded outside the group. Within hours, it is circulating across Chinese social media. By morning of December 31st, Wenliang's screenshot is the most shared medical post in the Chinese internet. The Wuhan Municipal Health Commission issues a statement the same day acknowledging 27 cases of pneumonia of unknown cause at Wuhan Central Hospital and several other city hospitals. The statement says there is no evidence of human-to-human transmission and no need for public concern. On January 3, 2020, Dr. Wenliang is summoned to the Wuhan Public Security Bureau. He is questioned by police officers from the Cyber Division. He is accused of spreading false rumors online. He is presented with a written admonition document, which the officers instruct him to sign. The document states that his warning to his medical school friends on December 30th was an illegal act that has seriously disturbed social order. The document requires him to acknowledge wrongdoing, to promise not to repeat the offense, and to accept that further violations will result in criminal prosecution. Dr. Wenliang signs the document. He later told the Chinese media outlet Caixin in an interview conducted from his hospital bed in late January that he signed because he was afraid. He was a 33-year-old doctor with a pregnant wife and a young son. Refusing to sign would have meant immediate detention. He signed. He went home. He reported back to work at the hospital the next morning. On January 10, 2020, while treating a patient in the ophthalmology clinic who had not yet been diagnosed with what would later be identified as COVID-19, Dr. Wenliang is himself infected with the virus. He begins running a fever on January 12th. He is hospitalized on January 14th. His condition deteriorates rapidly through late January. On January 30th, from his hospital bed, he publishes the police admonition document on his own social media account, along with a statement identifying himself publicly for the first time as the author of the December 30th warning. The The post goes viral across China and then globally. By early February, Dr. Wenliang has become the single most visible human face of the emerging pandemic. He is interviewed by Chai Xin. He is interviewed by the New York Times by phone. He says things that are, for a Chinese citizen in his position, extraordinarily direct. He says that a healthy society should not have only one voice. He says that the authorities who silenced him made the outbreak worse. He says that he hopes, after he recovers, to return to the front line of treating patients. He does not recover. Dr. Wenliang dies at Wuhan Central Hospital at 2:58 in the morning of February 7, 2020. He is 33 years old. His wife is 8 months pregnant with their second child. Their son, aged 4, is at home. Doctor. Li's death is announced on Chinese state media, first as a rumor, then denied, then walked back, then finally confirmed 6 hours later in a carefully worded statement that describes him as a medical professional who made significant contributions to the containment effort. The statement does not mention the police admonition. Within hours of the confirmation of his death, Chinese social media explodes in a wave of public grief and rage that is, by the standards of Chinese internet culture, nearly unprecedented in its direct criticism of state authority. The hashtag #WeWantFreedomOfSpeech is posted millions of times on Weibo before the censors can suppress it. Screenshots of his police admonition document circulate in every corner of the Chinese internet. 2 million users join a Weibo memorial page for him within 48 hours. The Chinese government, sensing the political danger of making Wenliang a martyr, attempts a partial rehabilitation. In April of 2020, the National Supervisory Commission of China issues a formal report finding that the Wuhan police had acted improperly in issuing the admonition and that the admonition is hereby rescinded. In April, Wenliang is posthumously designated one of 14 martyrs of the Wuhan epidemic response. His family receives a payment from the state. His widow, Fu Shuijie, gives birth to their second child, a son, in June of 2020. The child has never met his father. Here is what Blackwell wants you to understand. The rehabilitation is not the point. The rehabilitation is theater. The rehabilitation is the same mechanism that the Chinese Communist Party has used for 100 years to absorb embarrassing dissent after the fact and convert it into evidence of the party's capacity for self-correction. The party silenced Wenliang when his warning could have mattered. In early January of 2020, when authoritative public acknowledgement of human-to-human transmission by a credible Chinese physician might have accelerated the global response by weeks. The silencing happened at the operational level. It happened because provincial officials in Hubei, fearing embarrassment ahead of the Lunar New Year celebrations and the annual National People's Congress, decided that the smaller problem of political optics was more real than the larger problem of an airborne respiratory pathogen spreading through a city of 11 million people. The same pattern. Exactly the same pattern. 673 years after Girolamo Spatafora waved the Genoese plague ships into Messina harbor because the customs fees mattered more than the corpses on the deck. The final numbers for COVID-19, as of the most recent World Health Organization accounting: 7 million deaths officially attributed to the disease, 27 million excess deaths estimated by statistical reconstruction, 770 million confirmed infections, with real infection counts almost certainly in the multiple billions, trillions of dollars of global economic damage, long COVID affecting tens of millions of survivors, educational disruption for an entire generation of children, political destabilization across multiple democracies. The long tail of second-order consequences is still running. The pandemic, despite being largely over as a medical emergency, is still being paid for and will continue to be paid for the next 30 years. All of it. Every death, every infection, every ventilator, every empty restaurant, every canceled wedding, every last phone call from an intensive care unit, All of it came out of Wuhan in the last week of 2019. And the first medical professional to publicly name it was silenced by the Wuhan Public Security Bureau on January 3, 2020. Because the smaller problem of political optics was more real than the larger problem of what was incubating in the lungs of every patient being admitted to Wuhan Central Hospital that week. Blackwell has a photocopy of the police admonition document that Wenliang was forced to sign. Page 1. Date: January 3, 2020. Stamp of the Wuhan Public Security Bureau, Central District Branch. 2 signatures. Dr. Wenliang's signature in black ink in the bottom right corner, small and careful. And above it, a line of pre-printed text that reads in Chinese, "I have read and understood. I acknowledge wrongdoing, and I agree not to repeat the offense." Under which Dr. Li has written in his own hand the word yes. A single word. In the hand of a 33-year-old doctor who had 41 days to live, and who had just told the truth. Blackwell wants to close this file with a pattern. Not an opinion, not an argument, a pattern. 6 pandemics, 6 hinges. 6 accidents and 6 choices that turned the accidents into catastrophes. The accident is random, the hunter's cut, the sailor's flea, the cook's cough, the chef's blade. The doctor's patient. The choice is not random. The choice is always the same choice. The choice is always made by a named human being in a position of institutional authority. Girolamo Spatafora. Pedro de Maluenda. Charles G. Ballou. Belgian colonial medical directors. Guangdong provincial party officials. Wuhan Public Security Bureau Central District Branch. The choice is always the same. It is the choice to prioritize the smaller problem that is visible, nearby, politically embarrassing, and immediately costly over the larger problem that is still hypothetical, still abstract, still someone else's job, still on someone else's watch. The choice is always the bureaucratic choice, the choice of the risk-averse professional who does not want to be the person who overreacted, who would rather be wrong with the herd than right alone. It is always the same man, sitting at the same desk, making the same decision, 673 years apart, in 6 different languages, wearing 6 different uniforms, with the same logic, with the same rationalization, with the same tragic, fatal, inexcusable result. The pattern does not change. The pattern has not changed, which means the next one is already waiting. The accident is already in motion. Somewhere on the planet tonight, somebody is cutting meat they should not be cutting. Somebody is reusing a needle they should not be reusing. Somebody is breathing air in a poorly ventilated space next to a sick person. Somebody is being told by a superior that the unusual cluster of cases in the hospital they work at is nothing, is a coincidence, is not worth mentioning in the quarterly report. And somebody, at a desk somewhere, in a building with a flag outside it, is filing a warning that their superiors have decided to ignore, because the quarterly optics, because the election cycle, because the trade agreement, because the Olympics, because the IPO, because the smaller problem is always, always, always more real than the larger problem. The name of that somebody? Blackwell does not yet know, but Blackwell promises you this: that somebody exists right now, tonight, and is making that decision right now, tonight. And in 10 years, or 15 years, or 20 years, when we count the bodies, we will find that person's name, and the name will go into the file next to the names of Girolamo Spatafora and Charles G. Ballou and the Wuhan Public Security Bureau Central District Branch, and the pattern will have repeated for the 7th time, and then the 8th, and then the 9th. Unless something breaks the pattern, unless somebody, somewhere, at one of those desks, in one of those uniforms, decides that the larger problem is real, decides to sign the quarantine order, decides to release the warning, decides to tell the truth at 5:43 in the afternoon on a Monday in December, and decides to pay the price for it. Dr. Li Wenliang paid the price. He was 33 years old. His widow raised their son alone. The price was not fair. The price was never fair. The price has never, in 673 years of recorded pandemic history, been fair. And the people who pay it are not the people who made the decision that required the price to be paid. Blackwell is signing off on this file. The next file is about airplanes, about the small human decisions in cockpits and control towers and maintenance hangars that, when they go wrong, put hundreds of people into the ground at 600 miles per hour. Same pattern, different vehicle. Different bodies, same desks, same uniforms, same choice. Until next time, stay awake, stay suspicious, and remember the name of the man at the desk. His name is always on the document, if you know where to look.